Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up, and it is Transaction City. I mean, you look across all the sports league, MLB trade deadline, NBA free agency, their draft, the NHL free agency's gone wild. There's been trades galore in that one. I know I'm rocking the Bulls stuff today. Swig's got a Syracuse hat on. But before we get into any of that, there's some NBA stuff coming late in the episode. But before all that, Swig, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to have you back after a little sabbatical last week. We did all the basketball talk that you're aware of, and we'll finish off with some more of that. Like you mentioned, it's been a crazy couple weeks in sports with everything going on in baseball, basketball, hockey. Football's coming up with training camp, but we'll save that for another week. But yeah, this one's going to be jam packed. We have a lot to talk about today.
We do, and let's start with a crazy breakup that has been teased a little bit about what could potentially transpire with the Chicago Cubs expiring contracts. Jed Hoyer did not hold back. He traded Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, Chris Bryant, the main big core pieces, and then he also dealt some of the other pieces that he had: Craig Kimbrell, Ryan Tepera, Jake Marisnik, and also Jock Peterson early on in the season. But the three big names there: Javier Baez, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, all dealt. I don't think we've seen anything like this in sports.
I don't think it's completely unprecedented, but it is a little bit. It was almost jarring to see that much of a sell off, but. That's what you wanted, right? You wanted them to definitively sell. And if it was clear that none of those guys were going to re-sign or agree to extensions, then get some value for them before they just walk away for nothing, right?
Yeah, that's the right move. I wish they would have found a way to keep one of them, but honestly, if they weren't going to sign, it's best to move on and deal with the heartbreak now when you get returned back, as opposed to in the offseason when they up and leave and you get nothing, like the Tigers.
Right, or like John Tavares. I mean, now if you're trying to keep one of them around, I honestly think you'd just be thinking with your heart on that one, man. The Cubs are clearly. It was clear with the Yu Darvish trade in my mind that this was eventually going to come. Even though they did have a decent start to the season, the bottom finally fell out after the combined no hitter, and they took their direction and ran with it. They did get some pretty interesting pieces back in return, but this is clearly a team that's going to be rebuilding for a couple years, playing the long game. So it's a little bit jarring to see it because it hasn't really been too long since the Cubs were legitimate contenders with that core, especially with the three guys you mentioned who were all integral to that World Series in 2016. But they did get their championship out of it. And now, hopefully, for the Cubs' sake, the guys they turn these guys into are going to turn into some of the core of the next championship team down the line.
Yeah, it was definitely heartbreaking for a lot of Cubs fans in the city of Chicago to see the core pieces that brought that first championship in 108 years, that flipped the tide of the lovable losers in the city of Chicago to bring consistent winning, or at least consistent competitive baseball at Wrigley Field, is something you haven't seen in a very long time over a consistent basis. So to see those names go has got to be a little bit tough. But the future, I'm not going to lie. They do now have a top 15 farm system in baseball with the pieces they added. A lot of them will be ready around 2024, so it's going to be a little bit. But hey, Jed Hoyer, the general manager, does have some money to spend now. He didn't have enough to lock up all of those superstars, and none of them will probably come back, but he does have some to spend. So it could still kind of be competitive around 500 until you're good again.
It's possible. I don't think it's going to be the same thing we saw the last time the Cubs sold, where they were clearly trying to get the highest draft picks possible. And in fairness, that did get them Chris Bryant second overall, amongst other things. But I don't think it's going to be quite that drastic. The Pirates still exist, which is going to make it difficult for them to fall too far. But while the Cubs do still have a couple of decent pitchers to build around and a couple of interesting bats, it's clear that the immediate future is going to be a little bit bad, frankly, for the Cubs. But that is by design. Now, in terms of the value that you got back, I agree with what you said. Top 15 farm system. The Cubs have understandably traded a lot of their prospects over the last few years to contend, and winning a World Series makes that worth it, in my opinion. Even if it's just one, that's the goal. But I was going to be a little pissed off if I heard you be like one of those dumbasses who said, "Oh, it's a top 5 farm system in baseball."
No
again
shot.
No shot. No, the fuck not. It isn't. They got some very intriguing pieces who could have an impact as soon as next season. But this is, to me, top 12 to 15 at best, a decent but still far from completed farm system.
The reason that it's so low is because the names on that list are so far away. That's the
Mhm.
2024s, the 17-year-old kids they got back. They picked up a bunch of fourth graders for you, Darvish. So it's going to take them a while to develop and to see where they will end up on the list. But they did sign a kid in the offseason internationally, Christian Hernandez, already a top 100 prospect, 17 years old. And they in the report on him, they said he has the potential to hit 320 home runs at the MLB level. That's a steep ask for someone of his age, but the system is still nice. You have the MVP of the futures game with Brennan Davis. He's still there. Miguel Amaya, catching prospect. Then they have the pitchers that they've been waiting on for a while to potentially come up. Alzolay made his debut. You have Keegan Thompson, Justin Steele, a lot more in the pipeline on that front. But looking at the players they got back, there are two names that really jump off the page for me. Actually, three. I like three of the players that the Cubs got back for Bryant Rizzo Baez, and one is from each team. The first one I like is from the New York Yankees. They got Kevin Alcantara. Kevin Alcantara, the center fielder. I think he's 19 years old. He's only played in 54 professional games. He gets on base. He has enough tools to where if he could find a swing, I think he's in a good spot of making an impact on the MLB roster. Then you look over to the New York Mets. That's where they got a good haul with Pete Crow Armstrong, someone who has David DeJesus type attributes, can get on base, can run a decent amount. So he could bring a lot to your lineup and probably won't flash the power numbers. And the last guy they got from the Giants, I know everyone's talking about the number 9 ranked Alexander Canario. I actually like their number 30 ranked pitcher, Caleb Killian, who has a career ERA of 178 in the minor leagues with 6-0, their 6-2 record, 178 career minor league ERA. And he's just had a good ERA everywhere he's been. He's 24 years old, and immediately from 30 on the Giant system dropped up, and he's at number 12 now on the Cubs system, and he's looking pretty good. I think he's an underrated pitcher, similar to when the Cubs got Kyle Hendricks from Texas. He wasn't a top 30 guy, but the scouting really prevailed his talents.
Hendricks wasn't even the main crown jewel of the return they got from Texas back in the day. But now, in fairness, if he was 30 in San Francisco and 12 in Chicago, that might speak more to how shitty the Cubs farm system
Hey,
was.
he was. I don't know about that. I mean, the Cubs system is. They have some decent names on there. I mean, Ed Howard. We haven't talked about him. There's enough names on that system that I think right now it's going to take a little while for people to see, but I'm actually excited. But like I said, many years away for a lot of the good players.
Yeah, Pete Crow Armstrong from the Mets should be the one who can make an impact a little bit sooner in the trades for those three main core pieces that have been with the Cubs for so long. He was a first-round pick of the Mets just last year. He's already a great defensive outfielder, a legitimate top 5 prospect in the Mets system. He has the talent to become the top overall one in the Cubs. I'm not saying it will happen, just saying it could. He could very well be an everyday outfielder as soon as next season, despite being, I want to say, 20 years old. So that one might have a little bit more of an immediate impact. The others, I agree, are a little bit further off. Now, if Killian was 30th in the Giants system, we know those rankings aren't perfect, but first place team with that deep of a farm system is pretty incredible there in San Francisco. But I agree with what you said. The prospects, both of the ones they got back from the Yankees, are in high A ball that are long-term plays that have a lot of upside, but are not going to be with the team probably until 23 or 24 at the earliest. I don't have a problem with that. It's definitely a long-term play for a team that's clearly not going to be contending in the immediate future. I definitely understand that thought process. You're taking a swing on these guys. Obviously, not all of them are going to hit, but if you kind of hit the jackpot with one or two of them, it'll make a huge impact.
And to be fair, I didn't mention a couple of the other players, Alex Canario from the Giants and Vizcaino, the pitcher from the Yankees. And Vizcaino, I mean, he hasn't had an ERA below 4.30, but he's pitched a decent amount in the minor league so far. He has a blazing fastball. He's going to be a late reliever or a guy that comes out of the bullpen late in games. So if there's any way for him to develop, the Cubs will try to get their hands on him and turn him into a Pedro Strop or a Carl Edwards Jr. type that can go out and blaze fastballs by you if he can get right.
Well, speaking of guys who pitch in the end of bullpen, I think we got to talk about Kimbrel going to the White Sox and part of the return that the Cubs got in that trade with Cody Hoyer, who could slot in immediately to a pretty higher leverage role in the Cubs bullpen. But in terms of the prospect returns or player returns that they got back, Kimbrel has a team option on his contract for the White Sox for 2022, which that extra year of control makes him more valuable. And damn, did the Cubs get a haul for him.
They did. And there was actually a rumored report that the Cubs were talking Bryant and Craig Kimbrell for to the Rays for Tyler Glasnow, but they were afraid of his medicals to where they didn't want to pull the trigger on him. And what I heard was the Cubs did have their choice of Nick Madrigal or Garrett Crochet. They chose to go Nick Madrigal once again because of the arm concern. So I think that move right there, once you got Nick Madrigal from the White Sox, that allowed you to say, okay, we can move on from Javier Baez. You have Nico Horner at shortstop for a few years. And I'm not going to lie. I'm a big Nick Madrigal guy, but I mean, I think him and Nico Horner have such similar play styles that you have two David Ecksteins on your team, and they're going to combine for maybe 15 home runs, but they're going to get on base. If you hit them back to back, it's going to be a little bit tricky. So I don't necessarily like how Nico Horner and Nick Madrigal are similar. I do like Madrigal better than I like Horner, so it sort of gives me some sort of leeway on that.
Well, first of all, if you don't like the idea of hitting them back to back, split them up in the order. There's a simple solution right there. You know that thing where you say, "Oh, it hurts if I do this." Well, then don't do that. You know,
yeah,
it can't. It doesn't have to be too complicated. I wanted to ask a question. Like, with Madrigal, who's out for the rest of this season, he should slot in as the everyday second baseman next year. Now, the Cubs have experimented playing Horner in center field before, correct?
they have.
Do you think that's going to be something that's a little bit more likely with Hayward's contract eventually expiring, or Ian Happ being a little bit inconsistent, especially if Horner's defense at shortstop isn't quite as good as it is at second base? Do you think they might put him in the outfield?
I think it depends on the clock of some of the guys in the system. They have, I think, 7 top 30 shortstops, which is insane. But they're all years away. So I think it depends on the clock if they want to rush some of them up. Plus, there's a big shortstop free agent class. Carlos Correa, Corey Seager. I mean, there's a lot of shortstops available. Maybe you end up signing one of those shortstop, which gives you the ability to put Nico in center field. I like that. I like that better. Putting Nico in center field gives you an opportunity. But Brendan Davis is also a center fielder, their top prospect, so he might end up getting a look if he has a nice spring training to where he could potentially get the everyday role with the April 17th service time.
Yeah, the Chris Bryant rule. If you end up with a couple of legitimate center fielders defensively, moving one of them over to right or left, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I'm sure the Red Sox will tell you that with Jackie Bradley Jr. and Mookie Betts. So it sounds like a good problem to have. And obviously, not all of those shortstop prospects are going to end up being Cubs. At least a few of them are going to end up getting traded for hopefully pieces that'll help them contend down the line. So you're not going to have 7 shortstops on your roster. This isn't the Sandlot, and even they didn't have 7 shortstops. So I do think there's a lot of options for this team, a lot of flexibility financially in terms of prospects, how they want to build their next contender, whether it's via trades, how much of it's homegrown, how much of it's free agents. So it's definitely a lot of possibilities to consider. It's not going to be fun in the immediate future. I'm sure as a Cubs fan, it kind of sucks to say goodbye to some of these guys. But the Kimbrel return, I think Cody Hoyer is somebody who can slot in a high leverage role in the bullpen pretty immediately here. If not right away, then at the very beginning of next season at the latest.
He's only 24 years old and can provide a lot to that bullpen. So a nice move to get someone like him. They did have a kid come up, Manny Rodriguez. I don't know if you saw him. 100-mile-an-hour sinker, just absolute darts. And he has a 90-mile-an-hour cutter. So it's a similar grip, but somehow he takes 10 miles an hour off. He made the Nationals look stupid in his MLB debut with 2 strikeouts. So I think that could potentially be their long-term Kimbrel replacement. But him and Hoyer, I mean, I know they're still very young, and I'm not going to call him Craig Kimbrel. I'm not calling him a Hall of Fame closer, but he's a nice piece that flashed so far early in his MLB career.
If you're trying to compare them right away, again, I'm going to tell you to lay off the crack, man. But we've seen this movie before. It's such a weird time for the Cubs in terms of how they want to, let's say, build their bullpen for the next couple of seasons. Basically, the rest of this season is going to be a bit of a test run to see how many of these guys can be long-term, high-leverage guys, because the life of a reliever, they usually end up getting traded or bouncing around the league a lot. And we could see that happen with a couple of these guys if they don't pan out, or if they want to build their team in other areas where they're not so strong or as an organization. And quick side note, that Cubs National Series had to be one of the saddest series ever watched, right?
Right, right. Yeah, you had everybody traded. I mean, Trey Turner was gone. I mean, the Nationals traded everybody, the Cubs traded everybody, and they just stuck them out there and said, "All right, which sellers are going to end up being the best team on the field?" So definitely interesting. And to follow up your point before we get into the Yankees talk, the Cubs, you mentioned getting some roles in the back of the bullpen, opportunities for them to pitch now. I think the same could be said about the infield situation. Kmart version of Chris Bryant, Patrick Wisdom, I like to call. He's getting a lot of at bats. He's playing third, first, left. They're putting him everywhere and playing him every single day. David Bodie has a chance to see if he's actually good or if he can potentially spend the season in AAA Iowa next year. And Matt Duffy, I mean, they're all getting some sort of playing time. Sergio Alcantara is short, 24 years old. They're just trying to get some playing time, get at bats to see if any of them can stick next year, which can make that decision in the offseason a lot easier for Jed Hoyer.
No, I agree. It makes sense to get some of these inexperienced guys some playing time in major league games against major league pitchers or hitters, depending on their position. It's not going to be a full telling sign in the last, say, 50, 60 games of a season that the Cubs have already decided as an organization, hey, we don't really care about winning this year. We're not going to anyway. We're building towards the future here. But get these guys some experience. Hopefully, it will give them a little bit of a leg up starting next season. Make some of these guys a little bit more comfortable. Obviously, there's a lot of variables that play into this. We've seen that in every sport, including baseball. But I'm sure from the Cubs' perspective, the idea is hopefully one or two of these guys really finish the season on a strong note, give you something to build off going into 2022, and then you can supplement the roster from there.
100% agree. Mr. Ricketts, if you're watching, spend some damn money. Anyway, let's get over to the New York Yankees. He's spending some money there. He's actually paying for Anthony Rizzo a little bit as he plays for the Yankees. And Rizzo has been on fire since coming over to the Yankees. They also added Joey Gallo. How do you feel about the additions?
I don't like it. I don't think we're good enough to be buying like that, but the Yankees finally have a little bit of balance in their lineup. I'll give them that. And Rizzo and Gallo are both very good defensive players. In terms of what the Yankees gave up, they didn't give up any of their top prospects for either of these guys. Rizzo is a true rental who this is the last year of his contract. He'll most likely be a Yankee for 2 months. They gave up two prospects with high upside to the Cubs, but they're not in the top 8 or 10 of the Yankee system. So it kind of speaks to the depth. And the Gallo trade, where Gallo's under contract for 2022 as well, the Rangers kind of went for quantity. They got 4 different prospects, but none of whom were super highly rated. The Yankees were able to keep Clark Schmidt and Luis Gil, who had a really impressive major league debut last night. And we'll get into the Yankees' current COVID situation later. But personally, I don't think the Yankees are good enough to really be saying, hey, we're going to go all in here, basically saying we hope to get to the wild card spot and hope to survive that one game, because we all know the Yankees aren't winning the division, right?
100% agree on that point. Looking at the Yankees, though, the one takeaway I had as a baseball fan from this deadline, I love the aggressiveness by the GMs. I mean, every single American League team that was close in the wild card race was like, all right, let's go in. They pushed their chips in and they said, let's go for it. And I think every single team got better in that race. The A's added Marte. They added Josh Harrison. The Blue Jays brought in Barrios, which is a big thorn in the side, who's in the division. I mean, there were such moves, so many moves that were made. And the Yankees, they made some nice moves on their front, but I think it was a move that Brian Cashman made to potentially keep his job. That's how I felt, because I think if he missed the playoffs with this team, given how much hype was into the season, some were calling them the World Series winners this year. I don't know if this was a move that Brian Cashman makes if he was not potentially on the hot seat.
I think desperation might be coming into play here. I also think some of the flaws that we've seen as baseball fans of being so right-handed heavy and not playing good enough defense and having Aaron Boone as a manager, I think we're finally starting to see some of these flaws culminate in so many of these horrible and completely avoidable losses that have really changed the course of the Yankee season. Now, I could go into detail about 8 particular games that have really made this season as frustrating as it's been. But the short version is if the Yankees only blew, let's say, 2 of those games, they're easily in the wild card spot right now instead of, I want to say 2.5 games out of it. Now, it's not impossible per se that the Yankees could sneak in as a wild card, but if they do, they're probably going to play either the Red Sox or the Rays in that game. And newsflash, we beat them about 14% of the time. So I don't really like the 1 in 7 odds of winning a wild card game on the road. So it's just, to me, I don't think it's really worth the risk. I thought the idea, if the Yankees decided to go full sell, then they could try to rebuild as well. But it would also try a rebuild on the fly strategy, and that usually doesn't work. The Yankees, on paper, should be better than they are. But in addition to the frustrating losses and the countless double plays, there's also been a ton of injuries and now another COVID outbreak. So it's just been a complete clusterfuck from start to finish. And somehow the Yankees have managed to play a little bit better in recent weeks, but there's still a lot of flaws. And now pretty much the entire pitching rotation is injured too.
Not a good look. Not a good look with everything going on with the Yankees. But I do admire you. We talk about they needed to add left-handed bats. Now, that's something I personally would have done in the offseason. I don't think I would have done it right now in this spot that they're in. But the Yankees are an organization where I think they could still find a way to get it done. I know Anthony Rizzo is new and he doesn't really understand everything that's going on, but he's really said, like, I feel like I'm in the heart of a playoff race. And whether you don't see it as a fan or not, the players believe that, hey, we're making the playoffs. But one point that you made, Garrett Cole against Boston and Tampa Bay has a record of 2-5 on the year. So if you're in a 1-game playoff against one of those division foes, it could be a tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, and who would you start instead? Because if it's not Cole, who's been inconsistent since the whole sticky stuff crackdown, and it doesn't take a genius to see that's had an impact. He's still had a very good moment since then. The complete game shutout in Houston was really cool. He had a good start against the Red Sox after that, where it was 6 innings, 1 run. You can't complain there. But outside of that, been mediocre at best for the most part. And I think Cole's still a good enough pitcher, spider tack or not, that he will eventually adjust back to being a good pitcher. But if he's not the elite one you paid $324 million, that's going to become a problem. And then outside of that, Domingo Germán, while inconsistent, had been on a high note before he got placed on the injured list. Cole and Jordan Montgomery, who's been very good lately, just hasn't gotten any run support. They're both on the COVID list right after Nestor Cortez and Wandy Peralta and a few others come off of it. And Jameson Taillon all of a sudden is the most reliable arm in the rotation. It's just been what a turnaround for him. But the rest of the rotation right now is just it's so different than anything you could have expected, because Luis Severino, who's back starting in rehab, hopefully he comes back sometime at the end of this month. We don't know if Corey Kluber is going to come back. So the rotation could theoretically get a lot better pretty soon, depending on how long Cole and Montgomery are out and how quickly they bounce back from I'm not sure how they're feeling at the moment, but you just don't know. It's a complete wild card. Taillon all of a sudden has been really, really good for the last 6 weeks after a horrible start. But outside of him, Luis Gil has had one very impressive start, but you're not going to expect him to stick around too long. You don't. Nestor Cortez has been a lot better than you could have asked for, but you have to feel some regression is coming. And then the lineup, again, it was clear that they didn't have enough balance for the last 2 years. Why make them like? I agree. It's weird to make the moves now instead of before a season.
The Gallo thing somewhat makes sense. I know he's a left-handed. I'm not going to go there. I know that he gets on base with walks and stuff, but I mean, he still finds a way to get on base. But the thing that makes sense with Gallo is he has that extra year of control. So that one makes sense on paper. Rizzo was just someone they add just to potentially give them a spike in the postseason. But one thing that I took away from this trade deadline, especially in the AL East, Boston rotation has been pretty weak. The Yankees, I thought needed to add. But what happened was the Yankees are really relying on Corey Kluber coming back, Luis Severino coming back, and Boston's relying on Chris Sale that comes back. I personally believe whoever pitches better between Luis Severino, Corey Kluber, and Chris Sale, I think the team that gets the most production out of either those two or the one pitcher is going to be the team that makes that next step, because Boston's looking pretty shaky after the deadline.
Well, they'll be fine. And Chris Sale's dominating in the minor leagues, and Tampa quietly, despite their flaws, is right back into first place. The only team in the AL East that went aggressive for a starter was the Blue Jays with Barrios. They were
Right.
the only ones who went out and got somebody instead of hoping somebody they already have comes back. Now, I get what the Yankees and Red Sox are doing because Kluber was having a decent season, and I kind of forgot to mention talking about the rotation. The Yankees also went out and got Andrew Heaney, which is
Right. Right.
yeah. Not a, I wasn't a big fan of that one. Now he had one bad start. He could get better, but he's to me a number 5 pitcher at best. And I'm not a huge fan of that move. I didn't think the Yankees were gonna overpay for Barrios, especially because the Blue Jays gave up a pretty good amount to get him for the next season and a half. But I was hoping they would get somebody at least a little bit better than Andrew Heaney, but hopefully he improves after his start. The Yankees have reshaped their bullpen a little bit too. So Darren O'Day is out for the season, but Chapman seems to be doing better after his horrendous stretch. Zach Britton seems to be getting in the swing of things a little. Loizaga and Green have been decent for the most part, if not good, all year long. But it's the back end of the bullpen or some of the lesser known guys. Now, Lucas Lickey's had a really good year, but the Yankees, the first sign that they were going to be a buyer at the deadline was when they traded Luis Sessa and Justin Wilson to the Reds for essentially nothing to clear up some salary, which they, to stay under their luxury tax, Chicago and Texas paid salary. They went out and got Gallo and Rizzo and Heaney to a lesser extent. They also got Joely Rodriguez in the Gallo trade and Clay Holmes from Pittsburgh in a separate deal to fill in some of those middle relief spots. So they've completely retooled a bullpen that's been decimated with injuries all season long, has been decently effective. And they're going to need these guys to step up because, especially with Cole and Montgomery out, you can't really rely on your starters to give you too much length right now.
Yeah, and speaking about a team that you really need to get some reliability out of your starters, the New York Mets. They ended up trading at the deadline. They got Javier Baez, but their pitching rotation is really making me nervous. I mean, the Phillies are 1.5 games out of first place, and the Mets, after trading Pete Crow Armstrong, could potentially be in hot water.
The Mets are an interesting situation. It's weird the narrative around the Mets and the Yankees are so different, but I think it's mostly because the Mets play in a bad division and they've taken advantage of that. The Yankees do not. The Mets to me made more sense to buy, and also considering the change in ownership, you knew they were going to be aggressive. And getting Baez and Lindor when he comes back to play the middle of that infield, or I think what's going to happen actually is they're going to have Baez play third and play Jeff McNeil at second, because I think Baez at third is better than McNeil at third defensively. The Mets starting rotation, which we've talked about as a strength for so many years. Jacob deGrom is the best pitcher in the game when he's healthy, but he suffered a setback and he's going to be out till at least September. Taijuan Walker's been really struggling since the All-Star break after an amazing first half. David Peterson's out for a few months. Carrasco just came back. There's all of a sudden a lot of question marks in this Mets rotation.
Yeah, they did add Rich Hill prior to the deadline. He's a veteran that you could stick in there, but I mean, Rich Hill's Rich Hill. You know what you're going to get this point in the year. A lot of curveballs, gets rocked on occasion, so a lot of inconsistency there. And the Mets, they cannot. I've held off for many times. I've literally sat back and said, well, when the Mets get healthy, when the bats get healthy, they'll be good. But it seems like it doesn't matter. The pitchers go down, the hitters go down, and they can never get together on the same point. I always said once they do, they're going to be good. But I'm holding out hope right now. I mean, Philly went aggressive. They got Kyle Gibson to add to their rotation with Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola and a lot of good pieces. Bryce Harper hitting 299, 13 home runs. No one's talking about him. I mean, there's just so much stuff going on in the NL East where I think the Mets could potentially be getting buried without even looking. I mean, it's a tough spot. But I truly believe Atlanta continues to buy. I don't think Atlanta has what it takes to win the division, but I think this race in the NL East is going to come down to the late weeks of September.
Well, the last time that happened with the Mets and the Phillies, it didn't end so well for the Mets. And I know any Mets fan listening to this just got really pissed at me, and that was my goal. But I still think the Mets are the favorites to win this division. I think Philadelphia is still a flawed team, and I've seen Joe Girardi with my own eyes in a similar situation, making some incremental upgrades. You go back to the year the Yankees traded for Brandon McCarthy when he was there. There's a precedent here. The Phillies are decent enough. especially considering the Braves lost Acuna and the Nationals sold everybody and the Marlins just aren't there yet to be the team that competes with the Mets. But I still think the Mets have the best team in the division on paper. I also think that the last couple of weeks have shown, while they're striving to be what the Dodgers are, essentially, and they can get there, it still shows that they have a ways to go, especially in the lineup. The Mets on paper have a pretty balanced lineup. They've had a lot of injuries, but they're still sitting 14th in the National League in runs per game. Baez might help with that a little, but he's also a guy that is very streaky and doesn't always make contact and strikes out a lot, doesn't draw a lot of walks. What I'm saying is it's not a slam dunk. The Mets bullpen all of a sudden is going to have to be relied on for more because I still like Rich Hill. He's a late bloomer he really took off about 5 years ago, but he's 41 years old. You don't know how much longer he's going to stick around. Tyler McGill is filling in the rotation, and he's on the complete other end of his career. He just started. Carrasco's a wild card. So I'm curious to see what kind of role Trevor Williams has if he ends up getting some spot starts or what the situation is there.
Yeah, I think they optioned him to Syracuse just to try to get some sort of feel on how you want to figure out what he's going to do. I mean, he did come off an appendectomy. He's made a few starts with the Cubs, so they're just trying to get him ready a little bit, make sure they can put him in some big spots. But I mean, it's tough for the Mets right now. I mean, there's nothing really much we could say. They added Baez. They potentially could still be on their way to the playoffs. And I think one thing here is I'm excited to see Baez and Lindor play together. I mean, they were together, obviously, in Puerto Rico. Then they went to Florida, played against each other in high school, always competed, always wanted to see who was better. And now they get to be on the same team.
I think that is going to be cool to see on whether it's the middle of the infield or the left side if Baez ends up playing third when Lindor comes back. But Lindor is the switch hitter. You have a right-handed power with Alonso and with Baez now, and you have left-handed bats like Conforto and McNeil and Nimmo. It should be a better offense than it is. But we have seen some stagnation from the offense for a while now. Even when the Mets were winning more games earlier in the season, they weren't exactly outscoring everyone to do it. It was more relying on the pitching. And while their pitching has been a strength of the team for years, now that it's being tested a pretty good amount, the offense is going to have to step up. And I don't think Baez is going to be quite what Yoenis Cespedes was in 2015 as a midseason acquisition. That's a lot to ask of anybody. That was pretty superhuman for 2 months. And if they don't have somebody kind of carrying the offense like that, I don't know how likely it is we're going to see them sustainably score, let's say, 5 runs in a game. I don't think they've shown enough consistently to do that, Baez or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they still need to find a way to just they got to play together. You got to see this lineup together for a solid month to see how they're going to produce as the season lingers on. But they're still in a good position in a weak division, so good for them. Let's switch over to the White Sox. And the White Sox, they're in a situation now. They added to their bullpen, and did they ever? Talk about a 1-2 punch at Craig Kimbrell and Liam Hendricks, whichever way you want to go about it. One's a Hall of Famer, one's an All-Star. Good luck.
Yeah, that's you better have the lead against the White Sox after 7 innings, or at least be tied, and then hope somebody else can get some hits in the extra innings, because that 8th and 9th inning is going to be almost impossible. That is without question the best 1-2 punch in the bullpen in baseball. And we talked in the Cubs segment; it cost a pretty penny, and we knew Kimbrel wasn't going to come cheap. The White Sox could easily have both of these guys for 2022 as well. So that's an important piece to add to already a very good starting rotation and a lineup that's only going to get better with Eloy Jimenez and Luis Robert coming back after long absences. This White Sox team is running away with the division. I don't think them winning that is going to be any issue. And it's clear they're trying to win the World Series right now. And they went out and made a move to try to do it.
I'm glad that they did, because I truly believe like this. I've always believed in this White Sox team. I had them going to the World Series. I think I said against the Mets in my season prediction. Can't remember what it was. I know I had them in the ALCS. Either way, I love this White Sox team. I think they're built fantastically well. Eloy Jimenez has come back. He's slid into the DH role. It's not too fond of. Says it's boring, but he better learn it because he's not going to play the outfield for much longer. But Eloy's a nice bat. Robert's on a rehab assignment. I think they're going to start getting some pieces back to the puzzle that could potentially help them. And then they also added Cesar Hernandez, a solid second baseman.
Cesar Hernandez, I thought, was insurance for Madrigal even before he was traded to the Cubs. Madrigal being out the rest of the season, regardless, get an upgrade at that position. And Hernandez is a decent switch hitting guy who had some versatility to the lineup. Well, actually won a Gold Glove last year, I believe, even though he's never been super known for his fielding. More of a high on base percentage guy. But if he's your number 9 hitter in a lineup, I think you're in pretty good shape because he's far from a liability. And he's going to just provide a stable guy there while they wait to address the position more long term here going forward. The bullpen, even without Hoyer, is still in amazing shape and even better now after getting Kimbrel. I think one of the wild cards is. Do you think one guy who's been a little bit inconsistent, not terrible, but inconsistent, is Dallas Keuchel? And how much of a wild card do you think he's going to be to that starting rotation down the stretch here?
I think it's a spot for him that I mean he's the veteran part of that staff. I don't think it really matters about his production at this point. They've already won the AL Central. Sorry Tigers, sorry Indians, whatever it is. I truly believe like it's already done, and I don't think he's going to have a big role in the postseason. That's Lynn, that's Giolito, that's Rodon, that's potentially Cease out of the bullpen with his nice stuff. I don't think Keuchel's going to be that person. Similar to when the Cubs had like a Dan Herron in 2015, just someone that I mean, he might make the postseason roster out of the bullpen, but I don't think Keuchel's going to be an integral piece of this White Sox team in the postseason. But right now, I think it's still you still got to give him the starts and see what happens. Maybe Kopech slides in the rotation.
Kopech is an interesting one. Basically, it sounds like you're comparing Keuchel to what Tim Lincecum was for the Giants the last time they won a World Series in
Yeah,
2014. It gave me a very similar vibe there. A former ace who wasn't quite the same, but stuck around for some mop up roles in the playoffs because all bets are off with starting pitchers. You don't need all 5 in a playoff series, especially now that there's going to be the day off on travel days like there wasn't last season. So
I
you can
love
get
that.
away with a 4 game or a 4-man rotation, have a 5th guy who can be a long relief out of the bullpen if necessary, or for an extra inning game because extra innings won't be terrible in the playoffs, and I think they'll be a lot more entertaining to watch. Now. What the question that we have to address, obviously. Now the White Sox made these moves. Let's just look at the American League first. Do you think they are the favorite in the American League to make it to the World Series?
Yes, yes, I believe they are. Houston is a very close second. I think Houston is nice. I mean, I know cheating aside, whatever it is, Houston has a great ball club, and they're going to be scary because they always play good in the playoffs. It doesn't matter what it is. They made it to the ALCS in 3 out of the last 5 years, I believe it was, and they've shown up when the time matters. And I think it's going to be tough, but I think Chicago is the favorite in the AL.
So basically, you're saying Chicago or Houston, but not whichever team comes out of the AL East. So you don't see it being Tampa or Boston, right?
Tampa's interesting, but I don't see Boston and I don't see the Yankees.
Well, well, we agree. I don't see the Yankees, but that's because what's the opposite of rose-colored glasses? I see my teams through that.
Mud colored glasses.
Hmm. Okay, that's a new one. But yeah, I'm hoping you're right about Boston. But I think Chicago on paper is going to be the favorite here. Just as a fan, I don't want it to be Houston, but they do have a very good team, and they got Kendall Graveman in a bizarre trade to boost their bullpen. So I
Good
think
job,
that's
Seattle.
something that can help them compete a little bit. The Astros, I think, biggest weakness is in the bullpen, though. Even despite that acquisition, that's a place where the White Sox can have the advantage on paper. I guess the question I would ask is, as good as the lineup is, do you think it can match up with the amazing efficiency of what the Rays do every year, despite their let's say alternative strategy, or the very clear Astros lineup, which has been a strength of the team for years, despite all of their bullshit?
That's nicely put, but I do think the White Sox have the best team. I mean, you look up and down the lineup. Once they get healthy, I think they're all right. Their rotation's been solid, especially the top 3. The bullpen just got better. You also added Ryan Tepera, who's had a great year, and you could add some more pieces. You have Bummer, Crochet, Kopech, Kimbrel. I mean, Hendrick just lights out. It's literally lights out. High velocity, low velocity, ground balls, whatever you need, anytime. It's a nice spot for them. And I do have one thing on Cesar Hernandez before we get into hockey. Looking at Cesar Hernandez, here's a funny thing. Chris Davis had the 247 batting average for like 3 straight years.
Yeah,
Cesar
fourth straight.
Hernandez. Cesar Hernandez had a 981 fielding percentage every single year since 2016.
Hmm. Man, baseball gives us some crazy stats like that, and I love it every single time. And that's just that's amazing. I don't know why, but yeah, it's a lot like Davis. I get that one. That's pretty cool. I think he'll be a solid stopgap. Now, if you're going to point to a spot that might be a little bit weaker for the White Sox, it would be second base. But yeah, you got better in the short term. Obviously, there's going to be a weakness somewhere on the roster, and I still think Hernandez is far from a liability. So I think the White Sox are at the very worst a top two team in the American League. So if they don't make it at least to the ALCS, I will be very surprised.
Yeah, it's looking good for the White Sox, and there's no easy way to transition, so we're just going to hop right into it. We're heading to the Chicago Blackhawks, and we do have an update on their situation before we dive into some crazy moves they made on the ice. But Swig, can you provide an update with the Chicago Blackhawks organization?
Yeah, I'll provide a brief one. Like we mentioned before, there have been two players during the 2010 Stanley Cup run that alleged sexual assault and abuse by Brad Aldrich, the former video coach. Aldrich eventually went on to do some more horrifying things with Miami of Ohio and at a high school in Michigan. And we talked about all of that in depth a few weeks ago. So if anyone hasn't heard it, highly recommend you go back and check that episode out. I want to say it was about 3 weeks ago. The title of the episode is Blackhawk Scandal. So you guys will find it. But one of those two players who alleged the abuse filed some court documents. I don't want to read all of the details. We'll post a link to the full thing here in the comments of this video on YouTube, and we'll post them somewhere on social media as well. The short version is in that lawsuit, some of the details are that Aldrich allegedly, and I'm reading straight from the document here, threatened one of the two players at least with a baseball bat before forcing non-consensual sex and eventually ejaculating all over one of the players. So I apologize for the graphic imagery there. There is more to it, but that's the short version. It's quite disgusting, and I want to make sure that we're both clear that nothing that the Blackhawks do on the ice or personnel wise is anywhere near as important as what happens here and how this investigation involves or what happens, who gets punished, all of that. So this is much more important. We want to make sure we start every Blackhawks segment, if possible, with any legal updates we can.
Yeah, it's a very, very bizarre and tough, unfortunate, horrible situation for the Chicago Blackhawks organization, and it's not getting any press. I mean, we've talked about it for about a month now, and if someone's just tuning in to listen to this for the first time, they're going to say, "What the hell?" And we were on it literally a month ago talking about what happened, and the NHL is sitting there with their thumb up their ass, not doing anything about the situation. So it's very tough to see as a Blackhawks fan and as anything as a human being, just to see what's going on with that Blackhawks organization. It's sickening, and it doesn't make me feel good at all.
Agreed. It's completely disgusting. And I know we've talked about it in depth. I want to briefly mention a couple of things. So we have talked about Blackhawks say they're going to do an internal investigation or, excuse me, an independent investigation into the allegations. And that's great. But neither the Blackhawks nor the NHL have committed to making the findings of that investigation public, which is problem number one. And it's not getting enough media press, but we're going to cover it. It's the most important thing. And the fact it's not getting more attention is incredibly disturbing in our view. But they haven't committed to making the findings public. And then on another separate note, some of you, some fans or listeners might have heard allegations against Evander Kane, who plays for the Sharks. His estranged wife levied some allegations that he was betting on his own games. And while that is worth looking into, the fact that the NHL immediately replied with a statement saying we take this seriously, but not a peep about this. Like, I know that they can only say so much while an investigation is happening, but it's clear that they're prioritizing the alleged gambling from an estranged wife 100 times more seriously than one of the original six teams covering up the sexual assault of two of its players during a playoff run. So it really is disgusting as hockey fans, huge hockey fans, both of us are, to see where the league's priorities lie. There are things that are more important.
Yeah, there are. But we're going to look at the on ice situation. And if you're looking as a fan of the Blackhawks, you have to be excited because the Madhouse on Madison could possibly be rocking again. I mean, you look at the moves that were made. You bring in a Vezina contender in Marc-Andre Fleury. He's won Stanley Cups. You look at Seth Jones bringing on the defensive side. His brother Caleb Jones is going to be on a nice third pair in Rockford. And then you look at Tyler Johnson, who is a nice depth piece to add to that team. I think they made a lot of moves with players that have had playoff experience and have won cups. And I think it's a smart move on the front office side to throw your chips in and try to win one more with the core you got there with Caden Taves.
Yeah, so I'm on the ice here. It's kind of weird to transition to talking about on ice stuff again, but since we'll focus on it for now. Getting Fleury for essentially nothing, and he is going to play.
Nice.
Kind of helps provide some stability and depth in the goaltending spot. Can allow Lankinen to be more of a 1B or even a backup, which nothing personal against him. I think taking some of the pressure off of him for next season will be beneficial for him long term. He had a very good rookie season, but throwing him into the fire right away, I don't think would be wise. Now, the Tyler Johnson move, the Blackhawks were able to trade what was left of Brent Seabrook's contract to Tampa, get a second-round pick and a middle six player in Tyler Johnson back. So I do like that one. But let's address the Seth Jones one because the polite way to put that is that contract is going to be a complete albatross in a couple years.
Glad you said albatross. That was the word I was looking for. But I look at it right now. I've had plenty of time to think about it. I have a 48-hour rule, and that's something that I've learned to adapt. It's don't overreact until 48 hours have passed. So it's hard to do, but I tend to look in situations, and I looked at the Seth Jones trade. My immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, we got a defenseman. Then I looked at the metrics and the advanced stats of him, his play declining drastically last season. And then I looked at the contract, and I really got pissed. But then I've taken some time, and I realized it doesn't matter how bad he was last year. You stick him on the Blackhawks team, he's the best defenseman they've had since a prime Duncan Keith. I mean, it's no doubt about it. You stick him right there on the ice, and he can change your defense as a whole. And the reason I'm not so giddy on the Blackhawks right now is because I don't believe in Jeremy Colleton, but I do think that they finally have a capable team of being a playoff contender.
I think at best they're a fringe playoff team. And the Seth Jones contract is going to have a massive impact on their salary cap, even if he plays well. It's going to limit a lot of the moves they can make. And while I don't think it was even the worst trade that was made in the NHL last week. I think that would go to the Flyers getting Ristolainen. But the fact that the Blackhawks gave up, I know you're not big on Boquist, but there's still some upside there. Now, Seth Jones, I understand, played for a horrible Columbus team last year, and he wasn't going to put up great metrics anywhere. It's not all about the metrics to me. Seth Jones is 26 years old. He's had some good seasons in the past, mostly in Nashville, where he wasn't in John Tortorella's block shots at all cost system, where he could use his skating and his vision a little bit more. And I'm sure we'll see some of that return in Chicago. But let's say he does peak here in the next 2 or 3 seasons, where he gets back to where he was or maybe even exceeds that. His play is going to fall off a cliff. It happens with all players, especially guys who are so physical, and Jones is capable of being that guy. Their play tends to deteriorate quicker once they reach that point. And this guy, Seth Jones, is being paid the 15th highest salary in the NHL, $9.5 million a season until 2030. That is not going to end well regardless. Now, if the Blackhawks were in a position where they win a cup in the first, say, 3 years of that deal, where it might not be a disaster yet, then the rest of it would be worth it. But I don't think they're in that position. And while you can make the argument that Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews both have their big twin contracts that are coming off the books in 2 seasons, that might give them some flexibility. One or both of them might be brought back. Kane, if he is still a really good player. So it's not like he's going to take a huge discount to stay. He's going to have suitors. And I don't get it. I think the fact that the Blackhawks not only gave up Boquist, who's far from perfect, but has some upside, and then gave up 2 first-round picks, and then gave a guy who has not played well for 2 seasons a massive contract, I think that has huge disaster written all over it. It's a move that at the very best is a huge gamble, and at the very worst could completely sink this team for more than a decade.
That's some fighting words there. You got me a little bit riled up, but I guess your points they hold some weight. I truly believe it now. But I know for a fact that this is a direction the Hawks are trying to go in. They realize oh crap, we can't pull I can't use the San Francisco Giants anymore because they're actually winning with their old core. But I feel like it's a situation where you held on to them for a little bit too long, and they realize, oh crap, the clock's ticking. We have to make a splash and try to get back as quick as we can. And I will credit Stan Bowman to one thing: he gets forward depth very easily internationally. He can look, he finds a Kubalik, he finds a Cahoon, he finds a Pew Suter who they lost, he finds a DeBrincat. I mean, he gets everybody, and it seems to pay off. Philip Kurashev on that list as well. So he finds talent. So I think that's what's going to keep me a little bit more excited. I know Seth Jones' play is going to drop off. It happens to everybody, but you add him to that list. You still have young defensemen and Ian Mitchell, Nick Beaudin. You still have some nice pieces on that defense. I think they're close. You have a good goaltender too, in Marc-Andre Fleury for a year at least. Kevin Lankinen develops behind him. It's going to be a nice tandem to where they're going to steal some of these games that they wouldn't have had a chance at last year. So it does speed up the clock on this team. I don't think they're a cup winner. I don't think they're close for a cup for about a year or so, but it's going to be a tough situation for them if this doesn't work out.
I think we're more agreed on the offense and the goaltending, but even if we do give Jones the benefit of the doubt, where Columbus has been a really bad team, especially last season, and the system he played in might not have been great for his abilities, but he was one of the worst defensemen in the league last season. And I understand that you're banking that he can turn it around and that he's only 26. I'm not saying it's impossible, but just from an asset management standpoint, trading 2 first-round picks and Boquist, and then giving Seth Jones a massive contract that is going to keep him into his mid-30s, that is not necessary if you wanted to acquire him. The trade is one thing. Like, okay, I understand why Boquist goes the other way. Columbus is taking a chance on a young, inconsistent guy with upside. And I guess you knew 1 first-round pick was going to go, even though, frankly, he hasn't shown that he was worth the first-round pick the last couple of seasons. But moving down 20 spots in this draft and then giving up a first-rounder next year, when at the very least it's possible the Blackhawks are a middle-of-the-pack team where that first-round pick is going to be decently valuable. It's just I can't wrap my mind around that. I don't really like the idea. And then you had no choice but to give him a massive contract extension to keep him around and even make any chance of this trade working out a possibility. I'm not saying he's Zadorov or anything, but I was right about him. And I don't think Jones is going to be that unmitigated disaster in year 1. But if he starts out on a bad note, considering everything that was invested to him, both financially and with other assets, they are going to get on him quick, and it's going to snowball into a complete disaster. The proportions haven't been seen since the Hindenburg crashed. So there is true disaster potential here, and I don't see a ton of upside.
Wow, that's it kills me that you were right on Zadorov, because now I'm starting to feel like you might be right on Seth Jones, which you do have valid points, and I don't know. It's going to be a tough situation to unfold for. I mean, hell, you got him through 2030, so buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a hell of a ride. Let's head over to the Rangers, who made some moves of their own. Buchnevich going to St. Louis, one of them, and they also brought in tough guys, Ryan Reeves being one of them. How do you feel about the Rangers' move so far this offseason?
As you might expect, I'm not thrilled. I think they reek of not only the Tom Wilson game, which was a complete bullshit in itself, but we discussed that before. Okay. This whole offseason has given me vibes that James Dolan watched one hockey game, probably wasn't even the years, overreacted and said, hey, we need 8 guys like Cal Clutterbuck. Let's go give up everything to sign them. And that's essentially what they've modeled their offseason after, adding a lot of grit and toughness and making them harder to play against, and some other attributes that have arguably made them a worse hockey team. So I'm not anywhere near as optimistic for the future as I was previously, but we'll start with the biggest move. I hate the Buchnevich trade. I hate it so much. I'm not going to sugarcoat it in any way, because he was one of my favorite players on the team. He turned into a really well-rounded player who could kill penalties, was a legitimate top 6 winger who could score, had a well-rounded game, and I've always been a fan. And we trade him for a 4th-line winger from St. Louis and Sammy Blais and a 2nd-round pick in 2022. if that's really the best offer for him, keep him around for fuck's sake. That is not good value at all. And I hated that move. And amazingly, I don't think it was even one of the worst three moves in the NHL over that weekend. I thought Ristolainen and arguably Jones were worse, but I understand you could make the argument with Buchnevich gone that with the flat salary cap where you only have limited resources, but the contract he signed in St. Louis was pretty reasonable for 4 years. And as much as I like to think that Capo Caco and Vitaly Kravtsov can take those minutes in the top six, they are very unproven players at this point in their career, and they're going to be thrusted into huge roles. So I hated that trade from the start, and I still hate it.
Yeah, it's a situation where they're in a spot. You know, you look, Buchnevich can definitely bring some added value to your team. I mean, he brings goal scoring. He can really help you out. But what I thought immediately once the Buchnevich thing was going through, I really wanted to see, okay, could they end up potentially making that move for a center? And they didn't really make a big splash. I thought they were going to go and get the center that they've needed for a very long time, and there wasn't a big name guy that went there that a lot of us expected.
Not yet. I still don't think it's impossible the Rangers end up getting Jack Eichel, who has still not been traded somehow at the time of this recording. And he is eventually going to leave Buffalo. I still stand by that. And considering that a lot of the other supposed suitors for him, the Kings went out and signed Philip Denault. The Ducks don't want to get rid of Trevor Zegras, and I understand why. The Wild probably don't have the cap space even after the Suter and Parisi buyouts. The Sabres don't have a lot of leverage here, and it doesn't really make any sense for them to say eat half of Eichel's contract to try to get more. So if the Rangers do end up with him, I don't think it's going to be for anything crazy. I think it'll be something along the lines of what I said months ago. It could be Hedel, it could be Strome, one of those two. Along now that Buchnevich is gone, I think it'll be one of the Rangers' defense prospects, and then a draft pick or two. And that's going to be it. I don't think the Sabres have the leverage. If the Rangers include anything more than that, frankly, I'm not interested. But after the Buchnevich trade, they kind of backed themselves into a corner in terms of if they don't get Eichel, is there anyone else that's really still available that you could look at and say they will make the Rangers better right now, assuming they're healthy? Because I really don't think there is.
That's a fantastic point. I mean, Eichel really is the only one available right now, and it's a spot where the Rangers are. I think they shot themselves in the foot. They keep adding these big bodied guys because of one scenario last year. Well, not one. There was multiple scenarios where they got their ass kicked and didn't retaliate. But I mean, they come to a situation now, new head coach, and they're trying to adapt to a new style of play. But I don't think it fits this team. You need to find a way to still end up getting a goal scorer to replace the production that you lost with Pavel Buchnevich.
Right. And if you're trying to win now, I'd argue pretty easily, I think, that trading Buchnevich for pennies on the dollar arguably makes you worse. Now, Gerard Gallant, the new coach, plays such a high risk, high reward, up tempo style. You could make the argument, well, it remains to be seen. Guys like Kako or Lafreniere or Kravtsov theoretically should thrive in that kind of system. It suits their offensive skill sets. The Rangers still have a lot of skill on this roster. There's still a lot of upside. The defense is in pretty good shape, and Niels Lundqvist should be coming over. Outside of the Buchnevich trade, the Rangers signed Patrick Nemeth to play on the third pair. Fine. That's fine. He's basically a Brendan Smith replacement, decent third pair guy. Okay, sure. The top four of the Rangers' defense is still going to be Lindgren and Fox, and then Miller and Trouba, and you're in pretty good shape there. Niels Lundqvist comes over on the third pair now, and your top six is in pretty good shape, which is why I think Braden Schneider will end up getting traded in an Eichel deal if it happens. You have to deal from an area of strength. If there's not room for him to play, you might as well turn him into a something that you need. But outside of that, it's been the tough guys. Did I call Ryan Reeves on this podcast or what?
You did. You gave me the option of Reeves or Nosek, and you said one of them's coming no matter what. So kudos to you. You nailed it. And I guessed Reeves, but you gave me two options, so I could have got it wrong.
I'm not surprised it was Reeves, honestly. I know I said it was both, but I really did see that one coming. He's a guy who's beaten up Tom Wilson before, so it doesn't, and he's played for Gallant, so it doesn't take a genius to see why you might want to bring him in. Hell, Riley Smith might be next. He's a better hockey player, but he would make some sense under Gallant as well. And then some of the other guys, Barclay Goodrow is a good defensive player, good penalty killer. He's not only a tough guy. Sammy Blais has his moments where maybe you can put him on the third line. Is he going to be Buchnevich? No chance. No chance. And he's 24. He's my age. So while there's not a lot of upside left with him, the Jared Tenorti signing is even dumber in my opinion, because unless somebody gets injured, first of all, he sucks. And
Yeah.
second of all, he's not going to play unless someone gets injured. So I think it's overreacting toughness wise a little bit. But if they stop, now that they've gotten 3, maybe 4 pieces who are capable of beating up Tom Wilson on any given night, all right, fine. You're tougher to play against. You're less likely to get pushed around. That's not nothing, but you've addressed it enough. Now go get some guys who can help you put pucks in the net, because none of them can.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that front. So Rangers going to need to add some sort of scoring as we move on here. But looking at the Islanders haven't really done much. Quick little mention of them. Could you potentially see something in the works?
Yeah, I do think something is going to happen with them, and since we still have a lot to talk about on this one, we'll be skimming over the Islanders for the most part, who haven't done anything yet. I read an article saying essentially the reason they haven't re-signed any of their restricted free agents in Pelech, Bavillier, or Sorokin yet, or bring back any of their unrestricted guys, is because Lamoriello doesn't want other teams to know how much cap space he really has until after Vladimir Tarasenko is traded from the St. Louis Blues, which I am confident is going to happen. We just don't know where yet. And the Islanders are a team that makes sense for him as a landing spot, but I think that's part of the reason they haven't announced these signings yet. The restricted free agents will be kept around. The Islanders don't have Eberle anymore. They traded Nick Leddy. They have cleared some financial flexibility for themselves. They're going to keep these young guys around who are so vital to their success. I think a couple of the UFAs and Cizikas, maybe Palmieri, are a lot more likely to be brought back as well, but that remains to be seen. But since none of it's actually happened yet, I feel like we should wait until they actually is official before we address them too much, because we still got basketball to talk about.
Smart, yeah, and that's a smart move by the GM. Don't tip your hand on how much cap space you have. But let's dive in to the NBA. NBA deals are flying off the walls. Obviously, some of these aren't going, and there might still be moves before the episode drops Thursday at noon. But let's start with the Nets. The Nets really basically just filled their needs to run it back, it seems like. So Patty Mills was an addition, among others.
I really like the Patty Mills move. He's a really good 3-point shooter, especially on the catch and shoot. Only a 2-year, $12 million deal. I think it's a really reasonable contract. And outside of that, we did kind of say the Nets are going to be running it back with their core. They obviously have the big 3 still under contract. They were able to bring Blake Griffin back on another 1-year deal. Bruce Brown accepted the qualifying offer, so he'll be returning. And we talked about some of the unseen value that he provided to the team. And outside of that, they didn't lose a lot. We knew Dinwiddie was going to go elsewhere, and he ended up being in a sign and trade where he went to the Wizards. Jeff Green ended up going to Denver. Brooklyn replaced him with James Johnson, who's a really versatile forward who can guard multiple positions, and Mills. And outside of that, it's going to be a really similar roster. I think they're in good shape to run it back. They stay healthier. They should be an absolute title contender.
Yeah, the Nets are in great shape. I mean, you get the players that you already have to go with your studs. I think bringing back Blake Griffin makes a ton of sense there, too. He seemed like once he got over there, it gave him an opportunity to just fit in well, and he actually gelled well with the offense and everything they did. So he brought a lot to that team. I'm glad that he re-upped as well.
At best, Blake Griffin is your 5th option on offense, considering
Right.
Kyrie and James Harden, Kevin Durant, Joe Harris is back. It's amazing just how much offensive firepower the Nets have. They replaced Jeff Green, who filled his role very well, with James Johnson, who's also capable of guarding multiple positions, which makes sense. I think Patty Mills should step in as the 6th man right away, and also gives them a little bit of insurance, because the Nets did trade Landry Shamet at the draft, losing a little bit of the shooting they have, and Patty Mills is more than capable of replacing that. And I think we should talk about what they ended up doing in the draft a little bit. They were more active there than I expected them to be, and they ended up with a couple of guys I really liked at the end of the first round. And then my sleeper of the draft in the second round, in Kessler Edwards from Pepperdine. He's to me kind of a lesser version of Matisse Thybulle on Philadelphia. I think he's going to be a defensive wing here one of these days. Cameron Thomas should be able to provide a little bit of scoring if the Nets ever get hit with the injury bug. There's a lot to like about what they did.
Yeah, I like their moves at what they did at the draft as well. To your point, they've made a lot of good splashes as of late, and I know that their depth was tested when they ended up making the trade for James Harden and going all in with the Jared Allen deal and all that stuff. But they found a way to replenish some of that depth through the draft, and then also I like the going back to Patty Mills real quick. I like as a sixth man, he gives you sort of you lose Spencer Dinwiddie. You needed a backup point guard that could legit come in, shoot the three, do a lot of things well, and I think Patty Mills fits perfectly with this Nets team.
He does. And you knew, considering the high luxury tax bill the Nets already have, that bringing Dinwiddie back was just not going to be realistic. So they got a couple of picks. They got a trade exception for him. They got something of value. It's obviously worth being cap strapped when you're a team that, if you're healthy, is one of the two best chances to win a title, I'd say. It's either them, well, maybe three if you count Milwaukee, considering they just won, but those two and the Lakers. So you have to like your odds. You're pushing your chips to the table there. I like it. I think Mills is a really, really good pickup. And if Kyrie Irving misses some time, which seems likely, whether it's injury or just getting some rest here and there, he can start. He provides some really good depth there. We know what he's capable of with his days in San Antonio. So I really do like what the Nets have done so far, and they're in great position to be a title contender again. I have no doubt.
The Knicks added a point guard. How do you feel about that?
Man, I got to tell you, I didn't see Kemba Walker coming, but I like that one. And considering that he's a huge upgrade over Elfrid Payton, and B, a legitimate point guard who can create his own offense and will provide some insurance, be a starter, actually, and then have Derrick Rose and Emmanuel quickly coming off the bench where they were so effective. I like that move. And supposedly it's going to be a 2-year contract, about $8 or $9 million a year after the Thunder buy him out. I think that's pretty reasonable. I know Kemba's not perfect, very injury prone his last couple years in Boston, and he's not quite what he was at his peak in Charlotte, but he's absolutely still a guy who can add another dimension to this offense in terms of scoring, creating for others. It's definitely a move that should make an instant impact.
I love the move. I'm a big Kemba Walker fan. I watched him once I moved down here to South Carolina. I got the channels to watch the Charlotte Hornets all the time. And I'd turn on the games, and that dude was just a baller. I mean, he dropped 50 on a night. He scores. That's what he does. He gets to the basket, he scores, and he shoots the three. He does everything well from a scoring perspective. And that's what the Knicks need. They need someone that can score consistently. And that's what Kemba's going to bring. You don't know what Julius Randle's going to bring after the breakout year last year. It locked up Nerlens Noel, which could be a nice addition there. Alec Burks also back to go with Derrick Rose, you mentioned. So there's a lot of moving pieces with this Knicks team, but some are staying in place, which helped them get to the playoffs last year.
Yeah, no, the way I would put it is not too many moving pieces. It's mostly keeping most of the same guys around. It's the Knicks are going for a lot of continuity this year, which is a little jarring to see. The Knicks have had a lot of roster turnover the last few years as they've floundered in the league's basement for almost a decade until this season. This year, I'm still not 100% sold on them in terms of what's going to be happening here with this core going forward. Now, I'd argue Noel had a career year, Randall had a career year, Alec Burks, you could argue, had a career year. How likely is it that any or all of them not only replicate but improve on what they did? I would argue not very likely. And then we have to touch on the other free agent signing. The one guy, so we mentioned four players the Knicks had internally. I expected Rose, and my money was on Alec Burks to come back, and they did. I was more surprised where Nerlens Noel was brought back on a 3-year deal. Reggie Bullock was the one who was not kept, and the Knicks brought in Evan Fournier instead. I've talked with a lot of people about this one. I'm still not entirely sold on it, but similar to Kemba Walker, he is a guy who can absolutely shoot from the outside, is a much more dynamic offensive player than Reggie Bullock was, who was strictly catch and shoot from the three. He can create his own shot and create for others. And if there's one thing that we saw in that playoff series, it's that the Knicks, outside of Derrick Rose, had nobody who could create their own shot. Having Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier should absolutely help with that. And theoretically, it'll give Julius Randle and especially RJ Barrett more room to operate offensively in the half court. So I do think the offense should be better. Upgrading from Elfrid Payton to Kemba Walker is like going from a 94 Toyota Camry to a Camaro. I mean, there's a huge difference there. But I'm still it is still a little weird to me to see the Knicks just basically running back as a very similar team, because at best, even if the Knicks do have another good year, I'd argue that in the East, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Miami, at best, will be better than the Knicks. So right there, sixth place is, I think, the ceiling for this team. And anything lower than that, you're in the play-in tournament.
Yeah, that's a I don't know. I think I like the Knicks' moves so far. They added a bunch of guards. They had added a lot of scoring, so that I think that helps them out long term. Mitchell Robinson could be a big piece. I think he's going to be a deciding factor on how far the Knicks go. Can he take that next step? I know he's shown some flashes. Great rim protector, does a lot of things well. But I think if he truly becomes like elite, or even if he's a great player, I think that the Knicks could potentially jump some of those teams you mentioned in the East.
Robinson is a very good player, but staying healthy is the biggest question mark for him in my mind. Like there is some development of his game that could be used as well, but he missed a lot of last season with a leg and an arm injury, missed the playoffs, and Noel stepped up big time in his absence as huge insurance. Robinson's an interesting one. The Knicks got him in the second round. They picked up the team option on his contract, but that means he will be an unrestricted free agent after next season. So a big decision has to be made there. And then I got to ask this question, ignoring the standings and everything. The Knicks going into a few days ago had the most cap space of any team in the league, but we all knew that they weren't going to get Kawhi Leonard or Chris Paul or anything. So what do you do if you're a team that overachieved last season, has some goodwill going, and there's nobody really worth spending all your cap space on? I thought it kind of put the Knicks in a weird spot. They sign all of these guys to multi-year contracts. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I think these contracts could be traded. They're not complete albatrosses like, say, Tim Hardaway Jr.'s was, where you had to attach it to Porzingis to get rid of it. So if a bigger star does become available, I think the Knicks could get out of a couple or all of these deals. But if they don't, I think they're going more for a continuity, stability thing where they're a decent team for 2 or 3 more seasons. And then they could have a lot of cap space again in 23 or 24 because a lot of these deals are team options. So it's not the worst thing. If they're decent for 2 or 3 straight years instead of terrible for 7 in a row, it's a step in the right direction. But I thought the Knicks were kind of caught in a weird spot. They were the best team that had money to spend going into this offseason.
I agree. They did enough to where I mean they weren't going to land the big superstars, but they did a lot going on. Let's talk about a team that has sucked for 7 straight seasons, and that's the Chicago Bulls. They were splashy. We teased the Lonzo Ball thing. That was mainly you. So I'll point that out to you. You teased that last year before the trade deadline. You said Lonzo Ball, keep an eye on it, all that stuff. And Lonzo adds a lot to this team. His shooting's still developing. I think he's an average shooter, but he's a great facilitator of the basketball. Something Kobe White wishes he could do and he could never do. And Lonzo can add a lot to this team from a passing the basketball, generating the offense standpoint.
You kind of stepped on the transition idea I had for the Knicks to the Bulls. Yeah, what I like that we'll get into Lonzo in a second. I had this idea that you so rudely kept me from using.
Yeah.
That if we talked about some of the top free agents that were available, and one of the guys that was on that list was DeMar DeRozan, and the Knicks apparently were not interested in him, but Chicago ends up with him. You know, I had that great idea, and you were supposed to telepathically know that I was going to think of that. So I mean, come on,
so close,
asshole.
What 1 year, and I still can't do it. I apologize.
Yeah, ridiculous, man. Come on, I thought we had that, but. I mean, and for anyone wondering, we will talk about some of the draft picks that the Knicks made here going forward here as we get more into an NBA season preview. The short version is I don't expect them to play a ton because pretty much the entire rotation is going to be back next season. So I think there'll be more depth pieces. The Bulls really aren't worth talking about the draft at all because their only pick was a second rounder. So, okay, we will start with Lonzo Ball. Gonna pat myself on the back a little bit, but you could see the writing on the wall. It wasn't like I was the only one with that observation. I think, can we talk about Kobe White just for a brief moment? I think on this roster, he is the biggest loser of all of these moves the Bulls have made.
I agree. He's buried.
He's buried in a deep backcourt all of a sudden. That they bring in Lonzo Ball, they bring in Alex Caruso, they bring in DeRozan, who's you're going to probably play him at the 3. I understand that, but I'm not saying Kobe White's perfect. He's definitely not much of a facilitator. He improved though, and he's still a very solid and talented player. Who all of a sudden did Karnisovas just forget about him because he's really going to be a lot less of a factor if everyone's healthy. Now, I like Lonzo Ball a lot in terms of his distributing, his facilitating. He will be a better fit with Zach LaVine in that backcourt. I understand that. But considering Lonzo Ball, while he's improved as a shooter, I wouldn't call him somebody who creates off the dribble. So I guess I have to ask real quick. I think DeRozan's going to end up handling the ball a lot in the half court, and Lonzo Ball will do it more in transition and fast break opportunities. Do you see it playing out that way, or do you think Lonzo Ball will be asked to be the one?
That's a good point. I do think Lonzo in a situation to create, I think that's where he ends up bringing up the ball, even at the half court. I think if there's like a design play on that could get him to drive to the basket, kick something like that to where he can facilitate, that's on him. But the thing that DeRozan possesses most is that lethal mid range shot, and he can shoot off the dribble. He's got a nice turnaround, back to the basket jumper, and he does a lot of things well in the mid range department. So that makes sense if you're trying to create shots off the dribble. I think it's nice to have multiple pieces like that. Then you have Levine, who could honestly have the ball in the half court as well, do a slash. I mean, he could drive to the basket that way, and you could really, it sets up your offense in many different ways to have that many ball handlers. And then you also have Vucevic, who probably isn't going to handle the ball enough, but I mean, he's still going to get his boards. He's still going to shoot outside. He's going to do everything well. So I think the offense is drastically improved, and you have many, many options to go to whenever you want.
I do agree that the offense is going to be a lot better for the Bulls. It wasn't bad even last season. There were guys capable of scoring on that team. The defense was the bigger issue. But really quick here, before we get into that and before we get into some of the contract specifics on these guys, I do want to mention real quick that the both the Ball and the DeRozan moves were sign-in trades. So in addition to signing him, the Bulls did have to give up some pieces here. I'm going to just read this directly off my notes because I'm tired and I'm not going to remember everything. For Lonzo Ball, the sign and trade was Tomas Satoransky, Garrett Temple, and a second-round pick going back to New Orleans. I believe Garrett Temple already signed a deal to stay with New Orleans for a year. And then the DeRozan one is a little bit more baffling to me. So Lonzo got 4 years, $85 million on his deal. DeRozan got 3 years, $85 million. And to San Antonio, the Bulls sent Thaddeus Young, Al-Farouq Aminu in his contract, a future first-round pick, and 2 second-round picks. So he did not come cheap, both contract-wise and asset-wise. He's a really heavy investment.
Yeah, he's a heavy investment, but I know we might go back and forth on this, but I think he's an investment that is worth it. I think he's someone that can step into a situation in the Bulls and help them out. I mean, he's probably going to play the two. Levine slides down to the three. Maybe they're interchangeable with the 2-3, whatever it is. I don't know how they're going to send out the starting five, but I still think he's a nice piece to add to this team. You mentioned he has ball handling capabilities. He can bring the ball up if he wants to, even from the backcourt. He's good at the mid-range jumper. It's really good. His defense is there's a lot to be desired there. So I think it's tough for him to improve at this point in his career. But there was a reason that Toronto gave up on him to get Kawhi Leonard, and there's a reason that DeMar DeRozan, the Spurs didn't even want to pay him or even think about it.
Right. And I'm not saying DeRozan doesn't improve the team in some ways. He does bring some things to the table. But just focusing on the contract for a brief moment, you mentioned the Spurs weren't going to pay him, right?
Correct.
He gets $28 million a season when the only other team besides the Spurs who could have given him that much money was the Thunder. And the Thunder are not going to have use for a 32-year-old swingman when they are rebuilding. So, like, you could have – DeRozan's an unrestricted free agent. Who the hell were they bidding against? Like, why did they have to give him this much? If they really wanted him, I think they could have theoretically brought him in for a lot less. Like, it's one thing to be aggressive and get your guy, but if you don't have to spend $85 million and can still bring in the same player, it just that to me, that's not a good contract. I'm not saying he's a useless player or anything, but $28 million a year for a 32-year-old who's on the decline a little bit is a baffling move.
You know what this reminds me of? It's when the Jags went all in for Nick Foles. There was literally no one else available, even thinking about Nick Foles. But the Jags are the first ones at the table, giving all their money, saying, "Here, we want you, we want you, we want you." But you're bidding against yourself, so it's a tough situation for DeMar DeRozan. At the end of the day, the contract's pretty big. What they gave up was pretty substantial. Thad Young, great locker room guy, great basketball player. But I think at the end of the day, he makes your team better, and that's what you got to look at. Arturas Karnisovas wanted to build winning basketball in Chicago. It doesn't come cheap, and he ended up trading first-round picks to get the center Vucevic, and he's trying to just build something that he has his fingerprints on. And as a Bulls fan, you just got to say, at AK we trust, and hopefully it works.
we mentioned we wanted them to take a direction at the trade deadline, and considering how aggressive they were for Vucevic, you knew the Bulls were going to be aggressive in this offseason as well, really reshaping the team. We know Lauri Markkanen is probably on his way out. He'll probably get signed and traded somewhere else,
Good for him.
and that's fine. But there's just a couple things here. So this is going to be the Bulls' core, one way or the other, the next couple of years, because they don't have the finances to make trades really anymore at this point after all these deals, and they also don't have the draft capital because they traded 2 first-round picks to Orlando in the Vucevic deal, one of which was just 8th overall. Now, might have been pissed away on Franz Wagner, but that's a different discussion. They also gave up their 2023 pick in the deal. And there's a rule in the NBA where you can't trade first rounders in consecutive years. So that future first has to be 2025, if my math is right, or later. So they're going to have very limited draft assets for half a decade now. And if the Bulls, let's say everything works out, they have the starting 5 that's probably going to be Ball, Levine, DeRozan, Patrick Williams, and Vucevic, right? You have Kobe White and Alex Caruso coming off the bench with some other guys remaining to be seen. That should be a playoff team, or at least a play-in tournament team.
Yeah.
I'd make a similar argument with them that I would with the Knicks, though, that the at the very least, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Philadelphia are better. I'd argue Atlanta and Miami are too. So let's say the Bulls and the Knicks are battling for the 6th spot with Charlotte or the Pacers or the Celtics. These teams could, while they've made some moves that will make them better, they could easily be fighting for, say, 9th place in the conference. The East has a lot of question marks for a lot of teams that could easily improve from where they were last season.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And one name that you did leave off the list that a lot of people forgot about, Marko Simonovic, was their 2nd-round pick in 2020. He's playing in the summer league. He's made his way over to the States, so he could potentially have a role on this Bulls team in the preseason, and you might actually see him in a Bulls uniform sometime this year as a backup center.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't even think about him. So good call on that one. But considering Daniel Tice went to Houston, maybe he provides some insurance for Vucevic. But I look at the team. I think it's still going to struggle defensively. If DeMar DeRozan, who's never been a good defender, was the guy guarding the subway gate, you would have a much easier time hopping turnstiles. Let me put it that way. So you bring in now Alex Caruso, who's going to be off the bench, is a very good defensive guard who can help make up for that. And I wouldn't call Levine a great defender either. Same with Vucevic. So in the starting 5, you got Lonzo Ball, who can guard multiple positions, and Patrick Williams. Off the bench, you got Caruso, but it's still going to be, I think, a bad defensive team. And that's fine to an extent. Like the Nets aren't necessarily an elite defensive team either, but they have enough offense where they can overcome that. The Bulls are going to be strong offensively, but not that strong. And they're going to be even weaker defensively. And while I think the Caruso contract's pretty fair, pretty tradable if it ever gets to that point, you still got the questions with Levine and Vucevic, who are going to kind of have to stay around now, but you can't really give them extensions after these deals. I think the DeRozan contract is incredibly questionable. I still think that one's a weird fit. I'm not saying he won't do nothing, but is he good enough at this point in his career to push you over the top? No, I don't think he is. So I think there's a limited ceiling with this Bulls team. And we didn't even, I didn't even mention a minute ago, the Wizards are a bit of a wild card with Dinwiddie now.
Right.
The Raptors could easily improve. Like, to me, the only teams that are going to be at the bottom of the East next season are Detroit, Cleveland, and Orlando. And you could make an argument for anyone else. Now, the Bulls, they went all in, didn't make the play-in tournament. Levine was in the protocols. They should at the very least make that. But I don't think it's a guarantee. I still think there's a lot of flaws. They've absolutely improved. They're going to be a lot more competitive, but they are not a top 5 team in the East in my view.
I think Billy Donovan has a huge, huge factor in this. Billy Donovan's a great head coach, and I think at the end of the day, they're going to get in the playoffs because of Billy Donovan's coaching, and he knows how to maximize. He knows how to use the rotation of minutes, something that Boylan didn't know. Hoiberg sure as hell didn't. But it gives him an opportunity. You have a smart coach there with a good roster. I think that has a huge factor into who could potentially come out of the East. And I think I'm not saying the Bulls are coming out of the East. No, what I'm saying is they could potentially sneak into a playoff spot because of the coaching that Billy Donovan possesses.
There is some reason to believe that. You could look at the the anticipated improvement of Patrick Williams, who had a promising rookie season, should theoretically build off of that. Hopefully he does for the Bulls' sake. I don't know if I'm like I could see them finishing sixth, or if somebody in the top five that I mentioned, I think they're the top five teams, gets hit with the injury bug or something. Maybe they finish a little higher, but I guess I would ask, what do you think the ceiling for this team is? Because to me, it's first round playoff exit. And while they could improve on that, like there's still going to be some depth guys signed to fill out the roster. There have to be. There aren't any draft picks coming this year besides Ivanovic. So I still think you need some depth on the wing to replace Thaddeus Young. There might be some scrap heap options available, but the core of this roster is most likely set unless Kobe White is traded. Because I'd be really surprised if Markkanen's brought back. I'm just saying this under the assumption that he's gone. So you got the core of this team, considering a few teams in the East who are still going to be better than the Bulls, most likely. What do you think their ceiling is?
I think their ceiling is fifth place in the East. That's just where I'm feeling right now. I don't think they're anything above that, but I do think they still need to add some pieces that can help them out. Maybe a Paul Millsap helps them, and maybe someone that I know he might command a little bit rich, but I mean he's getting older, so it's kind of ugly, but he could be a depth veteran piece.
If Millsap commands big money at this point in his career, it's going to be an even worse contract than DeRozan's. I don't think he was worth the $30 million a year he got from Denver a few years back. He sure as hell isn't worth it now. I personally wouldn't go down that road, but you lose a respected veteran type. Now, Millsap could still be that, but I'd prefer a respected veteran who can guard multiple positions, similar to a James Johnson type who the Bulls had once upon a time. Somebody who can help make up for some of their defensive deficiencies. Caruso can help in the backcourt. I still think you need a lot of help front court and on the wing defensively, because especially when Patrick Williams is not on the court.
Right, that makes sense. One more thing before we go. You look at this Bulls team. You know what could really make them better? Makes everyone better. Brian Scalabrine.
Yeah, okay. He makes everyone better.
That's who you need to add. Bring it back. Bring it back. All right, that's going to do it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Big episode. Broke down everything in the MLB trade deadline, the NHL free agency, NBA free agency. Be sure to check us out. We're everywhere. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all that good stuff. Make sure you leave a like, leave a subscribe, leave a follow, and leave a comment. Let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll dive into that a little bit. But that's going to do it for today. Until next time, for Swig, I'm Dylan Kearns. We will see you next time.